They rejected the sterile Apache girl, but the rancher said, "I want only you." She was born in a small Apache community where the land was dry, the mornings were quiet, and everyone knew each other's stories before they were fully lived. From a young age, she learned how to work hard. She helped elders carry water, cleaned homes, cooked meals, and respected traditions. She was not loud or demanding. She spoke softly and listened more than she talked. People often said she was a good girl, but those words never stayed long. In this place, a woman was judged not by her kindness or strength, but by what future others believed she could give. As she grew older, the pressure around her slowly changed. When she was a child, people smiled at her. When she became a young woman, the smiles faded into questions. Aunties watched her closely. Elders whispered. Mothers spoke about their sons and what kind of wife would be suitable for them. She noticed how conversations stopped when she entered a room. She noticed how invitations became fewer. At first, she thought it was her imagination. Later, she understood it was not. The truth came quietly, not through gossip, but through a doctor's words spoken with care. She was told she could not have children. The doctor explained it gently, but the meaning was heavy. She nodded, thanked him, and walked out with calm steps. Only when she was alone did she sit down and breathe deeply. She did not cry loudly. She simply stared at the ground, feeling as if a door had closed before she had even tried to open it. She did not tell anyone at first. She continued her daily life, waking early, working late, and helping wherever she could. But secrets in small communities never stay hidden. Someone noticed her medical visits. Someone asked a question. Someone else guessed. Soon, the truth moved faster than she ever could. It reached homes, meetings, and quiet conversations held after sunset. After that, everything changed. People did not insult her openly. They did something worse. They avoided her. They spoke politely but with distance. When marriage was discussed, her name was skipped. When young men visited homes, she was never suggested. She overheard sentences that ended when she walked closer. She learned the sound of silence, and it hurt more than harsh words ever could. Her mother tried to protect her. She said love was still possible. She said the right person would see her heart, but even her mother's voice carried worry. Her father said little, but his eyes showed pain. He knew how the world worked, and he knew how unfair it could be. She began to believe what others believed about her, that she was incomplete, that she was a burden, that she should not hope for too much. Still, she did not become bitter. She did not lash out. Instead, she became quieter. She focused on work. She helped on nearby lands, cleaned barns, cooked for gatherings even when she was barely acknowledged. She learned to keep her emotions hidden behind a calm face. At night, when the stars filled the sky, she would sit outside and think about a life she might never have. She imagined a home where she was wanted, where she was not judged for something she could not control. Those thoughts were painful, so she pushed them away. She told herself she was strong enough to live without dreams. As time passed, rejection became routine. It stopped shocking her. It became expected. She stopped waiting for kindness. She stopped hoping someone would choose her. She accepted that she would likely live alone, helping others raise families while never having one of her own. This acceptance was not peaceful. It was heavy, but she carried it with grace. What she did not know was that someone had been watching her for a long time. The rancher lived not far from the community. His life was built on early mornings, long days, and hard choices. He did not speak much either, but when he did, people listened. He respected the land, the people, and the work. He noticed things others ignored. He noticed how she showed up every day without complaint. He noticed how she helped elders who were not kind to her. He noticed how she never asked for attention but deserved it. He first saw her working quietly, carrying water under the hot sun. She did not complain or rest until the task was done. There was something steady about her, something rare. Over time, he saw more. He saw how she stepped aside so others could feel important. He saw how she smiled politely even when ignored. He saw strength, not weakness. He heard the rumors too. Everyone did. But he did not repeat them. He did not care for them. He believed a person's value was not decided by others. Still, he said nothing. He knew how quickly words could turn into conflict. He knew the expectations placed on him as well. A rancher needed heirs, people said. A future, they said. He listened, but he did not agree. She never noticed his attention. To her, men like him belonged to a different world. She believed no one like that would ever choose someone like her. So she kept her eyes down and her heart guarded. By the end of that season, she had learned one thing clearly. The world had already decided her place, or so she thought. What she did not realize was that the story was not over. The rejection she carried would soon be challenged. The silence she lived in would soon be broken, and the life she believed was settled would soon face a moment that would change everything. The days moved forward quietly, one after another, shaped by work, routine, and unspoken thoughts. The young Apache woman continued her life the same way she always had. She woke before sunrise, tied her hair back neatly, and stepped into the cool morning air. The land was familiar to her, almost comforting. No matter how people treated her, the earth remained honest. It did not judge, it only asked for effort. She helped wherever help was needed. Sometimes it was cleaning homes, sometimes preparing food, sometimes working outdoors under the open sky. People accepted her help easily, but their eyes rarely met hers. Gratitude was brief. Conversation stayed shallow. She learned not to expect more. When gatherings happened, she stood at the edge, doing what needed to be done, then leaving quietly before anyone noticed her absence. Inside, she carried a calm sadness. It was not loud or dramatic. It was the kind that settled deep and stayed there. She had trained herself not to ask why. Asking only made the pain sharper. Instead, she focused on surviving each day with dignity. She told herself that being useful was enough, even if being loved was not meant for her. Not far away, the rancher followed his own routine. His mornings started early, often before the sun showed itself. He checked fences, tended to animals, and made decisions that affected many lives. His work demanded strength, but also patience. He was known as a man of few words, but fair ones. People respected him because he never spoke lightly and never acted without thought. Over time, his eyes returned again and again to the same figure. He noticed her long before anyone thought to point her out. He saw her moving steadily through work, never rushing, never slowing down. He saw her treat elders with care, even those who spoke coldly about her behind her back. He noticed the way she listened, how she gave space to others, how she never demanded attention. What struck him most was her silence, not the silence of fear, but the silence of endurance. She carried herself as someone who had learned to accept disappointment without letting it destroy her. That kind of strength was not common. He respected it deeply. At first, he told himself it was nothing. He had responsibilities. His life was already full, but his attention did not fade. It sharpened. He began to notice small details. How she paused to help someone even when she was exhausted. How she looked up at the sky when she thought no one was watching. How she smiled politely, then quickly hid it as if she did not trust happiness to stay. He heard the talk around town. People always talked. They spoke of bloodlines, futures, and expectations. They spoke of what a woman should bring into a marriage. They spoke of her as if she were a problem to be avoided, not a person to be understood. He listened, but the words did not sit right with him. Something about the way they spoke felt shallow and unfair. He did not argue with them. He did not defend her out loud. Not yet. He knew how easily a man could be misunderstood. He knew how quickly good intentions could turn into trouble. Instead, he observed. He thought. He weighed his own values against the rules others seemed to follow without question. He had grown up believing that life was not a checklist. It was built through shared effort, loyalty, and trust. He believed a home was made through patience and respect, not just tradition. The more he watched her, the more certain he became that she understood these things too. She, on the other hand, remained unaware. To her, the rancher was distant, part of a world she assumed would never cross with hers. She believed men like him chose partners easily, from families with strong names and clear futures. She never imagined that someone like that would look twice at her. One afternoon, their paths crossed briefly. She was delivering supplies, moving carefully under the weight she carried. He noticed and stepped closer, offering help without making a scene. Their exchange was short, polite, respectful, but something passed between them in that moment, a quiet acknowledgement. A shared understanding that did not need words. She thanked him and moved on, her heart beating slightly faster than usual. She told herself it meant nothing. Kindness did not always lead to connection. She had learned that lesson well. For him, the moment stayed longer. Her voice was calm. Her eyes were steady. There was no hesitation, no expectation. She accepted help without shame and gratitude without exaggeration. It left an impression deeper than he expected. As weeks passed, he found reasons to be nearby when she was working. He never hovered, never intruded. He simply remained aware. He watched how others treated her and felt something close to anger, though he kept it under control. He understood people feared what they did not understand. Still, fear did not excuse cruelty. He thought about his own life often during those days. He thought about the future others planned for him. He thought about the pressure to choose someone who fit an image rather than a truth. He wondered how many people lived unhappy lives because they followed expectations instead of listening to their hearts. She continued to move through life as if nothing could change. Rejection had taught her not to dream too far ahead. She focused on what she could control, her work, her behavior, her integrity. She believed this was enough. It had to be. But something subtle began to shift. She noticed she was no longer completely invisible. The rancher's presence, though quiet, was consistent. He treated her with the same respect he showed everyone else. No pity, no distance, just fairness. It confused her at first. Then it unsettled her. Then slowly it warmed something inside her that she had tried very hard to keep buried. She told herself not to misread it. Hope was dangerous. Hope had hurt her before, so she stayed cautious, polite, reserved. By the end of that period, both of them stood on opposite sides of a choice that had not yet been spoken. She believed her path was already decided. He believed the world was wrong about her. Neither of them knew how close they were to a moment that would force the truth into the open. The silence between them was not empty. It was full of meaning, waiting for the right time to break. The change did not come suddenly. It arrived slowly, through looks that lasted a second longer than necessary and pauses that felt heavier than silence. The young woman sensed it before she understood it. Something around her had shifted. People were still distant, still polite without warmth, but the air felt different, as if a quiet tension had settled over the community. It started with a meeting. Meetings were common, especially when elders wanted to discuss land, work, or the future of the community. Everyone was expected to attend or at least be present nearby. She went as she always did, not to speak, but to help. She prepared food, set things in place, and stayed at the edges where she would not be noticed too much. The conversation that day turned toward families and future plans. Voices grew firm. Opinions were shared openly. The tone was serious, almost heavy. She kept her head down, focusing on her task, but she listened without meaning to. She had learned long ago that even when people did not speak to her, they spoke about her. Someone mentioned the importance of strong families. Another spoke about tradition and responsibility. Then, without warning, her name came up. It was not said with anger. It was said casually, which somehow made it worse. A voice suggested that some people were not suitable for marriage and should accept their place. Another agreed, saying it was better not to give false hope. The words were not cruel on the surface, but they were sharp underneath. They reduced her life to a single detail, ignoring everything else she was. She felt her hands shake slightly. She placed the item she was holding down carefully so no one would notice. Her heart beat fast, but her face remained calm. Years of being overlooked had taught her how to hide pain. Still, this time felt different. This time it was public, clear, final. No one defended her. No one spoke her name with kindness. Silence followed the comments, a silence filled with agreement. That silence hurt more than the words. She finished what she was doing and stepped away quietly. No one stopped her. No one asked if she was all right. She walked outside, breathing deeply, feeling the ground beneath her feet. The sky looked the same as it always did. The land had not changed, but something inside her had. She realized then that she could not continue living like this. Not because the work was too hard or the days too long, but because the quiet judgment was slowly breaking her spirit. She had spent so long accepting less that she had forgotten she deserved more. She did not cry. Instead, she made a decision. She would stop hoping for acceptance from people who had already made up their minds. She would live honestly, even if that meant living alone. That thought hurt, but it also brought a strange sense of clarity. Inside the meeting space, the rancher had heard every word. He had attended the meeting for practical reasons, but the conversation took a turn he had not expected. When her name was spoken, something inside him tightened. He had known people talked. He had known they judged. But hearing it spoken so openly, so casually, made his chest burn with anger he had not felt in years. He looked around the room. He saw faces nodding. He saw people he respected agreeing without question. That troubled him deeply. It made him realize how easily fairness could disappear when tradition was used as an excuse. He noticed her leave. She did not storm out. She did not demand attention. She left the same way she always did, quietly and with dignity. That hurt him more than any argument could have. He understood then that her silence was not weakness. It was survival. For a moment, he considered standing up and speaking right away, but something held him back. Not fear, but the knowledge that words spoken in anger rarely changed minds. He needed to be sure. He needed to speak from truth, not impulse. He followed her outside a few minutes later, keeping his distance. He saw her standing alone, looking out at the land. Her shoulders were straight, but he could sense the weight she was carrying. He wanted to say something, but he did not know how. Comforting words felt small compared to what she had just endured. She sensed him behind her and turned slowly. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was heavy but not uncomfortable. It felt honest. "I didn't mean to overhear," she said finally, her voice calm but tired. "You didn't," he replied. "They spoke openly," she nodded. "They always do." There was no bitterness in her voice, just acceptance. That acceptance troubled him. No one should have to accept being dismissed like that. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that they were wrong. But he also knew that words alone would not undo years of rejection. Instead, he said something simple. "You didn't deserve that." She looked at him, surprised. Not because he said it, but because he said it without hesitation, without conditions, without explanation. "Thank you," she said softly. That was all. She did not ask for more. She did not explain herself. She turned and walked away, leaving him standing there with thoughts he could no longer ignore. That night he could not sleep. He replayed the meeting in his mind. The words, the silence, her calm response. He realized that the choice he was facing was no longer about the future others expected of him. It was about the kind of man he wanted to be. He thought about how easy it would be to stay quiet, to follow tradition, to choose safety. Many people did. But he also thought about how empty that life would feel if it meant ignoring truth. The next day, the community felt restless. News traveled fast, especially when something uncomfortable had happened. People sensed tension, though few spoke of it directly. She went about her work as usual, but inside, she felt detached. Something had broken, and she was not sure it could be repaired. She avoided the meeting place and kept to herself. She told herself that distance was protection. Still, she felt a quiet ache she could not fully ignore. Being spoken about as if she were not present had reopened old wounds. Later that afternoon, she saw the rancher again. This time, he approached her with purpose. His expression was serious, not angry but determined. "I want to talk," he said. She hesitated. Part of her wanted to say no, not because she disliked him, but because she feared what hope might do to her if she allowed it to grow. Still, she nodded. They walked a short distance, far enough to speak freely. He stopped and faced her. "What happened yesterday wasn't right," he said, "and I won't pretend it was." She listened carefully. She had heard kind words before, usually followed by distance. She waited for the part where he would explain why nothing could change, but he surprised her. "I don't agree with them," he continued, "and I won't stay silent about it anymore." Her heart beat faster. She looked at him, searching his face for doubt or hesitation. She found none. "You don't have to say anything," he added. "I just needed you to know that." She took a deep breath. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because choices matter," he said simply, "and I'm done letting others make them for me." She did not know what to say. Her life had taught her to expect rejection, not challenge. His words felt like a door opening somewhere she had believed was sealed shut. They stood there for a long moment, both aware that something important had shifted. The community had drawn a line without asking her opinion. Now, someone else was preparing to cross it. Neither of them knew exactly what would happen next, but one thing was clear. The quiet rejection she had endured was no longer going to remain unchallenged. The moment she had been avoiding was approaching, and it would change both of their lives in ways they could not yet imagine. The moment came slowly, almost like the sun rising behind the hills. It did not arrive quietly, but it did not come with loud fanfare either. The young Apache woman went about her morning, performing the tasks she had done for years. She woke early, tied her hair back neatly, and moved with the familiar rhythm of work that had become her life. There was a calm in her routine, a sense that the day would be predictable, even if the people around her were not. Yet, today felt different. She noticed it first in the way people's eyes lingered slightly longer than usual. She felt whispers that had been carefully avoided in the past now brushing against her awareness. Something was changing. She did not yet understand what, but a quiet tension wrapped itself around her. The rancher arrived at the gathering spot for a community discussion, as he often did. He did not come to cause conflict, nor to defy tradition. He came because he knew the day had arrived where silence was no longer enough. He had watched the young woman for months, admiring her strength, her patience, and the quiet dignity she carried despite the rejection of others. What had begun as simple observation had grown into something deeper, a recognition that she deserved truth, honesty, and respect, even if the world refused to offer it freely. The discussion began as usual. People gathered to talk about responsibilities, family, and future plans. As she stood quietly, performing her customary role of preparing the space, she felt the same familiar weight settle upon her. She had learned to accept it, to carry it with quiet grace. But before the meeting could unfold fully, the rancher stepped forward. His presence shifted the room instantly. People turned their heads, sensing the seriousness in his voice, the firmness in his stance. He spoke clearly, without hesitation. His words carried authority, but also a rare honesty. "Enough," he said, and the words seemed to ripple through the room like a sudden wind. The murmurs stopped. Eyes widened, some with shock, some with curiosity. "I have watched for a long time, and I will no longer remain silent. There is someone here who has been dismissed, overlooked, and judged unfairly." The young woman paused, frozen for a moment. She had seen him before, had spoken with him in brief, quiet moments, but she never expected this. Her heart beat faster, a mix of fear, confusion, and something she could not name. "I am speaking of her," he continued, his voice steady, unwavering. She has been measured not by her strength, her character, or her heart, but by a single part of her life that does not define her. He turned to look directly at her. I want only her. The room went silent. People exchanged glances, unsure how to react. Some whispered, some stared, but no one spoke immediately. The words were simple, but they carried immense weight. The declaration broke through years of quiet judgment, shattering assumptions that had been accepted as fact. For the young woman, the moment was overwhelming. She had spent years hiding her hopes, guarding her heart against disappointment. She had learned to accept rejection as a constant companion. And yet, here was someone standing before everyone, choosing her without condition, without hesitation, without regard for the expectations of others. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them away. She had learned to control her emotions in public. Instead, she focused on the rancher's face, searching for any sign of doubt. She found none. His gaze was steady, sincere, and unwavering. The world had told her she was unworthy, that she was incomplete, that she could never be chosen. And yet in this moment someone had done exactly the opposite. The rancher continued, his voice calm but firm. I do not care what others believe. I do not care what tradition demands. I care about what is right, what is honest, and what is true. I want her. I have watched her strength, her kindness, her patience, and her courage. That is what I value. That is what matters. Whispers began to ripple through the crowd. Some faces showed disbelief. Others showed admiration. Some looked ashamed for having judged her so quickly and so harshly. But the young woman hardly noticed them. All she saw was the man before her, standing firmly, offering her something she had never allowed herself to hope for, a chance to be chosen for who she truly was. She took a slow breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle over her. For the first time, she felt something she had thought impossible: hope. Not fragile hope, not fleeting hope, but a steady, quiet certainty that someone saw her fully, without conditions, without expectations. The rancher stepped closer, reducing the distance between them. His voice softened, but his certainty remained. I want you not because of what you cannot do, but because of who you are. You have endured much and you have carried it with dignity. I see you. I choose you. Only you. The crowd watched, a mixture of awe and disbelief hanging in the air. Some could not understand why a man of his standing would declare such a thing so openly. Others silently admired his courage, recognizing that it took far more strength to stand against social pressure than to follow it. The young woman finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything, he replied gently. I am not asking for words. I am offering truth. I am offering a choice, and the choice is yours. Her heart raced. She had spent years believing that love was something she would never experience, that her life would be defined by rejection. And now, everything had shifted in a single moment. The man who had watched her silently, admired her quietly, and respected her from afar had stepped forward to speak truth in the face of judgment. She felt a wave of emotions: relief, disbelief, joy, and a cautious hope she had buried long ago. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a life where she was wanted, where she was valued, where her presence mattered. The thought was dizzying, almost frightening, but also exhilarating. The rancher reached out his hand, not as a gesture of possession but as an offering of partnership. Take my hand, he said softly, if you want it, if you trust me. She looked at him, studying the sincerity in his eyes. She felt the weight of years of judgment and rejection pressing on her shoulders, but in that moment she also felt a lift, a release. Slowly, carefully, she placed her hand in his. The crowd seemed to fade around them. The murmurs of surprise and disbelief became background noise. What mattered was this connection, this choice, this moment of truth. The declaration was more than words. It was a promise. It was a challenge to a world that had sought to define her by her limitations. It was a quiet revolution, a statement that worth is not measured by what one can produce, but by who one is. As they stood together, hand in hand, a sense of peace settled over her. She realized that the years of rejection, the quiet endurance, and the careful self-protection had not been in vain. They had prepared her for this moment, not as someone broken, but as someone who could recognize and accept truth when it appeared. The rancher's words echoed in her mind. "I want only you." Simple, clear, and unshakable. Those words were more than a declaration. They were a lifeline, a bridge to a future she had never imagined. For the first time in her life, she felt fully seen. And in that recognition, she found the courage to hope again, to trust again, and to believe that love could exist exactly as it should, without conditions, without compromise, and without fear. The community could whisper, judge, or doubt all it wanted. But the truth had been spoken openly, clearly, and without hesitation. She had been chosen, she had been valued, she had been seen, and in that moment nothing else mattered. Together, they turned toward the future, ready to face the world not as individuals defined by expectation, but as partners defined by truth. The quiet strength she had carried alone for so long had finally found its match. And in that union of respect, courage, and choice, the beginning of a new life unfolded, one where hope, love, and dignity could grow freely. The days that followed the declaration were filled with quiet wonder, both for the young Apache woman and the rancher. Nothing had changed immediately in the world around them, but everything had changed in the way they saw themselves and each other. The moment of being chosen, of being valued for who she truly was, lingered like a gentle light over every task she performed, every movement she made. It was as if her life, once confined by limits and judgment, had suddenly opened into possibilities she had not dared to imagine. The rancher remained a steady presence in her life, not by imposing his will, but by offering his partnership. He did not rush her, and he did not demand attention. Instead, he respected her space, her pace, and her choices. Their conversations grew naturally, at first about work, about daily routines, and gradually about their dreams, hopes, and shared responsibilities. The young woman discovered that she could speak freely with him without fear of judgment. Each word spoken felt lighter than it had in years. Each laugh shared felt freer than she had ever known. For her, this was a strange and new sensation. She had spent much of her life believing that silence was safer than speaking, that waiting was wiser than acting. Yet, in his company, silence was not a shield but a comfort. Words did not carry the weight of fear, they carried the possibility of connection. She began to realize that her life, which she had assumed would always be measured by what she could not do, was now defined by the choices she could make and the love she could accept. The rancher, too, learned much in these early days. He learned that patience is not simply waiting, it is understanding, observing, and respecting the other person's pace. He realized that true connection requires more than admiration from a distance. It requires trust, honesty, and commitment. Each day spent together confirmed what he had already known deep in his heart, that she was not defined by her inability to bear children, but by her courage, integrity, and the way she carried herself in a world that often sought to diminish her. The community, of course, noticed the change. Whispers spread as they always did, but now they carried a mixture of surprise, admiration, and curiosity. Some could not believe that the rancher, a man of high standing and respect, had openly chosen someone whom others had dismissed. Others quietly began to reflect on the unfairness of their own judgments. Slowly, the young woman's presence became harder to ignore, not because she demanded attention, but because she had been chosen, acknowledged, and valued openly. With time, her confidence began to grow. She no longer carried the same weight of quiet resignation that had once defined her days. Small moments became larger victories. A simple smile from the rancher was no longer a fleeting comfort. It was a reminder that she had been seen and understood. A shared task in the field was no longer just work. It was a moment of partnership, trust, and mutual respect. Each act, each gesture, slowly built a foundation for a life that she had only dared to imagine in fleeting, quiet thoughts beneath the stars. They began to spend more time together, not in grand gestures or public displays, but in the simple, honest rhythm of daily life. They worked side by side on the ranch, tending to animals, repairing fences, and preparing meals. They walked together across the dry fields in the mornings, sharing stories and observations, learning each other's habits, fears, and dreams. The young woman discovered a sense of belonging she had never known before. She realized that her worth was no longer being dictated by others, but was affirmed by someone who truly understood her. This affirmation brought healing that was slow but undeniable. Old fears and insecurities, which had been carefully hidden for so many years, began to soften. She no longer flinched at casual rejection or assumed that she would be dismissed at the first hint of judgment. Instead, she learned to trust her own instincts and to trust the man who had chosen her. With each passing day, the layers of doubt, shame, and fear peeled away, leaving behind a sense of dignity, pride, and quiet joy. The rancher, in turn, found himself changed as well. He had always been confident in his decisions and his work, but he had not anticipated how deeply choosing someone against societal expectation would affect him. Standing by her, valuing her for her true self, required courage he had not known he needed. Yet in the process, he discovered a fulfillment and happiness that was different from anything he had experienced before. It was not loud, not dramatic, but steady, constant, and real. He found purpose in partnership, in choosing someone for love and respect rather than convenience or expectation. Together, they faced the lingering skepticism of the community with quiet strength. They did not argue or confront unnecessarily. They simply lived their truth openly and honestly. Over time, the murmurs of doubt began to soften. People saw them working together, supporting each other, and building a life rooted in respect and understanding. They could not help but notice that love, in its simplest and truest form, was flourishing despite the rules and expectations that had once confined her. The young woman began to imagine the future differently. She no longer feared being alone. She no longer believed that her worth was tied to what she could or could not do. She began to dream of a life filled with partnership, respect, and shared effort. She imagined a home where her voice mattered, where her presence was valued, and where her life was measured not by absence but by contribution, care, and love. The rancher, walking beside her in those moments, represented the possibility of that life, a promise made real through action and commitment. Evenings became their favorite time. After long days of work, they would sit outside under the wide, open sky, watching the sun set over the hills. The quiet of the land, once a place of solitude and reflection, now became a space of shared presence. They spoke softly about their days, their thoughts, and their hopes. Sometimes they sat in silence, letting the calm of the land and each other's company speak for them. In these moments, the young woman realized that connection could exist without words, that trust could grow without urgency, and that love could be patient, steady, and sustaining. The journey was not without its challenges. The whispers of judgment had not disappeared completely. There were still moments when old habits of dismissal and expectation threatened to surface. Yet, each challenge became an opportunity for them to reaffirm their bond. Each glance, each quiet gesture, each shared effort reminded them of the choice that had been made openly and clearly. Their connection was not built on assumptions or social approval. It was built on recognition, respect, and deliberate choice. Over time, their life together became a testament to resilience and courage. She learned that being chosen for who she truly was allowed her to flourish in ways she had never imagined. The rancher learned that standing by truth and love required patience, courage, and unwavering commitment. Together, they created a life that defied expectations, a life where dignity, partnership, and mutual respect became the foundation of everything they built. As the seasons passed, the young woman felt a quiet contentment she had never known. The fears that had shadowed her childhood and young adulthood were replaced by a steady confidence. She understood, finally, that rejection had not defined her. It had only prepared her to recognize true value when it appeared. She had been chosen, not because she fulfilled a checklist or met expectations, but because someone had seen her for who she truly was. The rancher and the young woman continued to live with intention and care, building a life that honored their shared values. Their partnership became a quiet example to others in the community. That love and respect are stronger than tradition and expectation, that true worth is found in character and heart, and that courage to choose rightly can change lives. In the end, their story was not one of drama or spectacle. It was one of quiet triumph, resilience, and love. A life once shadowed by rejection and doubt became illuminated by choice, respect, and recognition. Together they had found what so many seek but so few find: a home in each other, a partnership rooted in truth, and a future shaped by hope, courage, and unwavering commitment. And in that life, the young woman discovered a truth she had longed to hear, not in whispers or polite words, but in action and certainty. She was seen, she was valued, and she was loved, completely, without condition, and entirely.